My name is Michael Stevens, and the first crack in my marriage didn't come with a scream or a scandal. It came with a kiss that never landed. It was a Tuesday morning in October, one of those brisk days that feels like it's ushering in change whether you want it or not. I was standing in our kitchen, the one Sabrina insisted we remodel last spring. White marble counters, sleek chrome fixtures, the kind of place that was meant to look like success. I had a hot mug of coffee in my hands, steam rising like the last thread of comfort in a world that had started to tilt. Sabrina flew around the marble island with a kind of urgent energy I used to find endearing. She'd always been quick, always on the move, but now it felt like she was sprinting away from me rather than toward the rest of her day. Her perfume was different, stronger, spicier, something she'd never worn before. I noticed it the instant she breezed past me, too busy or too determined to pause. Her smile was there, but it was too polished, too rehearsed, like a line delivered on stage. I'd seen her put on a show before, but not for me. Big day? I asked, my voice steady, trying to hide the tangle of worry in my chest. She barely looked at me, just nodded and mumbled something about the Morrison account. The Morrison account that had become the catch-all excuse for everything lately. Late nights, early mornings, phone calls that needed to be taken in the other room. It was like an umbrella shielding her from accountability, and I'd let her carry it. I'd even held it open for her. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the heat anchor me to something familiar. "You're not going to sit down? Eat something?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She shook her head, lips pressed together in a way that once meant she was stressed, but now looked like she was bracing for an impact I hadn't delivered yet. "No time," she said. Morrison's team moved the meeting up. "I'll eat later." She kissed her fingers and pressed them to my cheek, but there was no warmth in it. It was an afterthought, an obligation, a goodbye disguised as a greeting. And then she was gone, the door closing too quietly, the echo of it sinking into the marble and glass like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. I stood there in the kitchen, the scent of her new perfume lingering like an accusation. 3 weeks. That's how long this had been happening. 3 weeks of late nights at the office, of calls she wouldn't take in front of me, of texts that made her smile at the screen like it held a secret she didn't want me to share. I'd noticed the inconsistencies. The shoes that didn't match the outfit she claimed to be wearing for work. The receipts that didn't line up. The stories that started to fray at the edges like an old sweater she'd worn too often. I'm a financial strategist. Reading patterns is my job. Finding the cracks in portfolios, the hidden fees, the market shifts that can make or break a client's future. But somehow, I'd missed the one unraveling right in front of me. Maybe I didn't want to see it. Maybe I'd spent so long believing that we were different, that she was different, that I'd let the obvious signs slip past me like water through a sieve. Jared Langston's name floated up from the back of my mind like a bad penny. Jared, my best friend since college. Jared, who was always punctual, always the guy I could count on for an honest answer. But he'd started lying too, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Meetings rescheduled at the last minute, his voice catching on the phone when I asked about his weekend plans. It was like watching a man try to run on ice, every step more desperate than the last. And then there was Sabrina, always so sure of herself, suddenly too busy for the things that used to matter. Like me. I placed the coffee mug on the marble counter and leaned against the island, staring at the empty doorway. The silence settled in my chest like a stone. I'd thought marriage was about weathering the storms together, about sharing the quiet moments as well as the loud ones. But this silence felt different. It felt like a verdict. I tried to remember the last time she'd kissed me goodbye without that distant look in her eyes. The last time her smile reached the corners of her mouth. The last time her laughter was real, not a rehearsed script. It was all slipping through my fingers, and the harder I tried to hold on, the faster it fell away. Maybe it was me. Maybe I'd become so consumed by work that I'd stopped paying attention to the details that once made her feel like she was the center of my universe. Or maybe she'd found a new orbit, and I was just the satellite she hadn't bothered to decommission yet. The Morrison account. That's what she said. I'd heard it 100 times now, and every time it felt more like a shield than an explanation. I was no fool. I'd seen the way she'd started to dress for work, like every day was a first date. The way she'd glance at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she'd flinch if I walked into the room too quickly. I walked to the window and watched her car pull out of the driveway. She didn't look back. Not once. I tried to convince myself that it was because she was busy, because she was important, because she was in demand. But the truth was, she didn't look back because she didn't have to. She'd already left me behind emotionally, if not physically. I sighed, the sound rough in my throat, and picked up my phone. I scrolled through my recent calls. Jared's name. The man who'd stood by me at my wedding, who'd toasted us at our anniversary dinners, who'd promised to always have my back. I wanted to believe he was still that friend. But the lies had started to stack up like debts I couldn't pay. 3 weeks. That's how long I'd been living in this new world. A world where my wife's perfume was different, her smile was scripted, and her excuses came too easily. A world where my best friend's voice carried the weight of secrets. A world where I felt like the last one to know. I turned back to the kitchen, the marble island now feeling like a cold monument to everything we'd built together. Or thought we built. I ran my hand over the smooth surface, remembering the laughter we'd shared while choosing the finish, the fights we'd had about the budget, the way we'd celebrated when it was finally done. It all felt like a scene from someone else's life now. The coffee had gone cold in the cup. I dumped it down the sink and rinsed the mug out, my hands moving automatically. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this. The first crack had appeared in my marriage, and it hadn't come with a scream or a scandal. It had come with a kiss that never landed, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get that warmth back. I stood there in the kitchen, alone, the scent of her unfamiliar perfume still in the air. I couldn't decide if it was a warning or a promise, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed answers. I needed the truth, and I needed it now. As a financial strategist, I'd built a career on reading patterns, subtle shifts in markets, behavioral blips in data sets that most people overlooked. I'd made my living spotting the anomaly that spelled opportunity or disaster. But somehow, I'd failed to recognize the anomaly unfolding right in front of me. I'd overlooked the deviation in Sabrina's smile, the hesitation in Jared's voice, the sudden evasions that grew like mold on a wall I thought was solid. It was the kind of blind spot that costs people everything, and I couldn't stop wondering how I'd missed it. Jared changed our meeting times. Always so reliable, Jared had once been the guy who would show up 10 minutes early to everything. He'd text reminders. He'd follow up with an email. Now, his texts came at odd hours, late at night, punctuated by too many ellipses, as if he were giving himself time to think of the next lie. Our usual Tuesday breakfasts were now Thursday lunch meetings, which he'd cancel at the last minute with a convenient client crisis. A crisis I never saw him sweat. I'd find him at his desk, sleeves rolled up, smile too wide, his screen filled with some spreadsheet or email he'd close a bit too quickly. I used to admire Jared's discipline, his ability to juggle half a dozen projects and still crack a joke that made the interns relax. Now, every time he laughed, it sounded like a rehearsal for a role he hadn't quite mastered. Bradley Ortiz, Sabrina's so-called family friend, had always been the easygoing lawyer with the open collar and the quick wit. He'd call me brother in that casual way that made me feel like he was on my side. But he'd started avoiding my calls too. The first time, I assumed it was court. The second, maybe a long client meeting. But the third time, when I showed up at his office on a whim, he wasn't there. His secretary, a chipper woman named Kendra, gave me a practiced smile and said, "He's in court." Court. But over dinner weeks before, Bradley had bragged that he'd given up trial work to focus on corporate clients. The cracks were no longer cracks. They were lines drawn in ink. And every time I tried to follow one, it curved away from me, leading me back to Sabrina's perfume, to Jared's laughter, to Bradley's sudden absences. It was like a game of chess where I'd forgotten which side I was on. I decided to test the lines. That afternoon, I went to Cornerstone Cafe, our usual haunt for post-meeting debriefs. Jared loved the place. Claimed it was the best latte in town, the place with the right kind of people watching that made business deals easier to read. I ordered a black coffee and sat at our usual table by the window. Jared was late, again. He walked in 10 minutes behind schedule, hair tousled, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder like a careless afterthought. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Michael," he said, the greeting too bright, too fast. "Rough morning?" I asked, sipping my coffee, watching him carefully. "Yeah, you know how it is, fire drills." He laughed, but it caught in his throat. "Fire drills," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. He pulled out his phone, checked something, then put it away like it burned his fingers. "Listen," he said, "about next week's pitch, I might have to push our prep session. Family stuff." "Family stuff?" "Yeah, my mom's. Well, it's complicated." I watched him talk, watched him spin the web of lies so casually. He was always good at stories. That was part of his charm. He could sell water to a drowning man. But now, his charm felt like a threat. "Of course," I said. "Take whatever time you need." His shoulders relaxed, but only for a second. "Thanks, man," he said, patting the table as if to seal the deal. "You're the best." I wondered if he even heard himself. When he left, I sat there with my coffee growing cold. The sunlight angled through the window, casting lines across the table that looked like a cage. I didn't know where to start unraveling the net, but I knew that every thread led back to Sabrina. Every one of them. When I got home that night, Sabrina was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. Her breathing was too regular, her body too still. She'd left her phone on the nightstand, but it was face down, always face down now, like she was afraid it might reveal something in the middle of the night. I went in my office and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Patterns. I'd always trusted patterns. I wrote, Jared's canceled meetings, Bradley's new court appearances, Sabrina's perfume, Sabrina's phone face down, the Morrison account, the Morrison account, the phrase that covered everything like a tarp over a crime scene. She'd said it again that morning, with that rehearsed smile. Morrison's team needs me in early. Morrison's team was in Boston. Sabrina hadn't been to Boston in months. I checked her expense reports. She hadn't filed a travel claim since July. I flipped to a new page. Morrison's team. Jared's family emergency. Bradley's court appearances. I stared at the words. My pen hovered over the page like a blade. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that this was all just bad luck, bad timing, a series of unrelated coincidences. But that wasn't how the world worked. Not in my business and not in my marriage. The cracks were forming a shape. I just didn't know what it spelled yet. I closed the pad and leaned back in my chair. The house was silent. Too silent. Even the refrigerator sounded apologetic. I wondered if I'd ever get the old Sabrina back, the one who'd stayed up late helping me prep presentations, who'd cheered when I landed my biggest client, who'd laughed at the cheap jokes I made in the car on the way home from date nights. I wondered if I'd let her drift away, or if she'd chosen the drift. I stood and looked out the window at the darkened street. A streetlight flickered, its glow too weak to chase the shadows. I felt like that light, barely holding on, pretending everything was okay while the darkness crept closer. As a financial strategist, I learned that sometimes the data doesn't lie, but sometimes people do. And sometimes the lie is so quiet, so polite, so normal that you don't see it for what it is until it's too late. I turned from the window and shut off the light. The legal pad lay on the desk, waiting for the next entry. I knew I'd fill it with names and dates and half-remembered conversations. I knew I'd have to fight for the truth, quietly, methodically, the way I'd built my career. Because I couldn't afford to miss the next pattern. Not this time. Enzo's was the kind of place that made you feel like you belonged somewhere important. White linen tablecloths, warm lighting that made everything and everyone look better than they actually were. Sabrina loved it. Said it was the only place in town that felt like New York. She dragged me there on Friday nights when we wanted to pretend our lives were a little more glamorous than they really were. I used to think Enzo's was ours, a place that carried the weight of all those shared dinners, the inside jokes, the anniversary toasts. I used to think we'd carved out a little piece of intimacy there that no one else could touch. But the truth was, Enzo's was just another stage. Another place for her to rehearse the lines she'd practiced with every man who'd thought he knew her. It was a Thursday night when I pulled into the parking lot, impulse driving me more than intention. My stomach was a knot of half-formed suspicions, a mess of gut feelings that had been building for weeks. I'd been working late, at least. That's what I'd told myself. And I'd stopped by the office to double-check the Morrison account, just in case. But the Morrison account was a ghost, a file full of dead ends and no activity. That's when I knew I couldn't wait for the next convenient lie. I had to see it for myself. The hostess at Enzo's gave me that bright, eager smile they reserved for regulars. I must have looked like I belonged there, pressed slacks, collared shirt, the same careful confidence I wore for clients. "Table for one?" she asked. "Actually," I said, glancing around, "I'm meeting someone. I think they're already here." She nodded and waved a hand toward the dining room. "Take your time." The dining room was alive with murmured conversations and the soft clink of cutlery. Enzo's was always busy, the kind of place where you could hide in plain sight. I moved through the tables, scanning the faces, searching for that familiar profile. And there, 3 tables away, I saw them. Sabrina and Jared. They sat too close, heads bowed together like co-conspirators. Her hair, the same honey gold I used to brush from her face, tumbled around her shoulders in perfect waves. She was laughing, her head thrown back just enough to let the candlelight catch her smile. A smile I hadn't seen in weeks. A smile I'd started to think was gone for good. Jared leaned in, his hand brushing her wrist, his face open and unguarded. The kind of face that belonged to my best friend. The kind of face I'd trusted with every secret, every frustration, every doubt. He said something, and she laughed again, soft and secretive. My heart turned to ash. I stood there, half hidden by a fake ficus, a coward with a view. Every instinct screamed at me to walk over there, to demand the truth. But I couldn't move. My feet were cemented to the floor. All I could do was watch. Watch as the woman I'd shared a life with leaned closer to the man who'd stood beside me at my wedding. Then she got up, excusing herself with that bright, practiced smile, and disappeared toward the restroom. Jared sat there alone, his phone in his hand, scrolling with an intensity one recognized too well. I reached for my own phone and checked my messages. Nothing. But then, as if on cue, my screen lit up with a text from Jared. Sorry about next week. Family emergency. Can we push coffee to Thursday instead? Appreciate your flexibility. My eyes shifted from the screen to him. He was right there, a few tables away, thumbs tapping at the same message he just sent me. He was covering his tracks in real time, even as he sat there with the woman he was helping to betray me. The betrayal didn't punch me in the gut like I'd always imagined. It didn't crash over me in a wave of anger. It sliced, clean and quiet, like a scalpel in the hands of a surgeon. I felt the cut, but there was no blood, just a cold, clinical realization that everything I'd feared was true. I thought about the Morrison account, about the countless nights Sabrina had claimed to be working late, about the perfume that wasn't mine to smell, about Jared's shifting schedules and sudden emergencies. It all collapsed into a single, undeniable truth. They'd been playing me, together, and I'd been too blind or too trusting to see it. I didn't know how long I stood there, watching him. He looked up once, eyes unfocused, as if the weight of what he was doing was just starting to sink in. Or maybe it was just another performance, one more mask he'd learned to wear. I wondered if he'd practiced it in the mirror. I backed away, the noise of the restaurant growing louder, voices blending into a single, accusatory hum. I felt like every pair of eyes in the room was watching me, waiting to see what I'd do next. But I didn't confront him. I didn't storm over and make a scene. My rage wasn't ready yet. My clarity was just beginning. I pushed through the door, the night air hitting me like a slap. The parking lot smelled of exhaust and old rain. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel, hands trembling but steady enough to start the engine. I stared at the steering wheel, at the reflection of myself in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, older than my years. A man who'd let the cracks in his life widen into canyons. I thought about Sabrina's laughter, about the way Jared's hand had lingered on her wrist, about the text he'd sent me, playing both sides like it was nothing. I thought about the years I'd given to both of them. The birthdays, the barbecues, the endless conversations about work and life and dreams. And I realized that whatever I'd thought we had, it wasn't real. Not to them. I didn't drive home. Not right away. I drove aimlessly, the city blurring past me in streaks of light and shadow. I needed time to let the anger settle, to let it find its shape. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was a game. And if they wanted to play games, they'd picked the wrong man to underestimate. Found myself parked outside a small convenience store, the kind that sold stale coffee and cigarettes. I bought a bottle of water and stood in the parking lot, the cold plastic grounding me. I felt the rage there, just beneath the surface, but I didn't let it out. Not yet. I learned in my work that timing was everything. That patience was a weapon as sharp as any blade. As I drank the water, I let the night settle around me. I thought about every conversation I'd had with Jared, every lie Sabrina had told me. And I promised myself that I wouldn't confront them with anger. I'd confront them with facts, with evidence, with the kind of cold, clinical precision that would leave no doubt about the truth. I didn't want to fight. I wanted a reckoning. I got back in the car and headed home, the road empty and silent. My mind was no longer clouded with hope. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd felt. And I knew that the man they thought they were deceiving was gone. In his place was someone who would watch, wait, and strike when the time was right. Because when betrayal slices clean, it leaves room for clarity. And I wasn't afraid of clarity anymore. It was a small thing, really. A detail that might have gone unnoticed on any other day. But that day, I'd given myself permission to look closely, to notice. Because I'd seen enough to know that nothing was as it seemed anymore. So when I saw her car parked on the curb outside her yoga class, where she'd claimed to be meeting the Morrison team at a pop-up strategy session I couldn't help but follow. Just to confirm. Just to be sure I wasn't the one imagining the shadows that had begun to stretch between us. She'd left the window cracked open, like she always did when she was in a hurry. A habit, she used to say, because she didn't want the car to get too hot. I leaned against the door, staring at the neat interior that used to feel like an extension of home. The reusable shopping bags in the back seat, the lavender air freshener that still smelled like her, the coffee stain she'd never bothered to clean. But it was the purse, half unzipped on the passenger seat, that caught my eye. She'd always been careless with her purse, always overstuffed. Receipts, lipsticks, business cards, sometimes even the odd thank you note from clients. But this time, something black and unfamiliar poked out from the top, a phone. Not her rose gold iPhone with the tiny chip on the bottom corner, but a different phone. Black, sleek, unfamiliar. I reached in, my fingers trembling as they closed around it. For a moment, I felt like a thief in my own life, like I was crossing some sacred line. But that line had already been crossed by her, by Jared, by every lie that had slowly eroded the foundation of what we built. I pressed the power button, half expecting a password, but it opened right away. No lock screen, no defense, like it was daring me to look. And I did. Messages popped up, each one more intimate than the last. Photos. Some of her. Some of Jared. Some of others, men I recognized from barbecues, from conference calls, from polite dinners where I'd sat across from them and laughed at their jokes. Miles, Trevor, Sean. Married men. Men with wives who probably thought they were safe in their suburban sanctuaries. My breath caught in my chest as I scrolled. Group chats with suggestive names. Friday Night Lights, Morrison's Morons. A text from Sabrina. Michael wouldn't notice if I brought Jared home for dinner. My hand went cold. I thought I was losing her to one man. But it wasn't just one. It was all of them. They'd turned me into a game, a bet. How long would it take before Michael saw it? How long before he figured out that the Morrison account was nothing more than a cover story for a revolving door of betrayal? My fingers shook as I kept reading. Sabrina's words in a different chat. I think he suspects something. Maybe it's time to move on. Another reply. He's a good man. He'll forgive you. They always do. Forgive. The word rattled around in my skull like a loose bullet. Was that who I was to them? The good man who'd always forgive? The husband who'd swallow every lie because I'd built my identity around being steady, reliable, the one everyone could count on? I set the phone back where I'd found it, careful to make it look untouched. My pulse was thudding in my ears, the blood rushing with a mix of rage and heartbreak that felt like it might drown me. I knew then that I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. I was dealing with conspiracy, a network of secrets that stretched from my own bedroom to every corner of the life I'd thought was safe. I closed the car door quietly and leaned against it, staring at the yoga studio across the street. Women in bright leggings carried rolled-up mats and water bottles, chatting about weekend plans and kale smoothies. I wondered which one of them was Sabrina's decoy today. Or maybe she really was in there, playing the innocent, stretching her body while her phone sat unlocked and damning in the car. I wanted to storm inside, to pull her out in front of everyone and show her the phone, to watch her face as the lie collapsed. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I walked back to my car, the air thick with betrayal. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life with a sound that felt like a promise. I wasn't the man they thought I was. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to scream or plead. I was going to dismantle this, piece by piece, thread by thread, until every lie was exposed. I drove home with my mind racing, planning every step like a strategist plotting the downfall of an empire. I thought about Sabrina's smile at breakfast that morning, the way she'd kissed me on the cheek like a soldier kissing the enemy before heading off to war. I thought about Jared's forced laughter, the way he'd avoided my eyes in every meeting. I thought about every man whose name I'd seen on that phone. I parked in the driveway, the house looking different now, less like a home, more like a crime scene. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to steady. I wasn't angry, I told myself. Anger was noisy. Anger left evidence. I was calculating. Inside, the house was silent. Sabrina wasn't home yet. I stood in the hallway, staring at the family photos on the wall, smiling faces frozen in time, forever blind to the darkness growing behind them. I let my gaze settle on each one, memorizing them. Not because I wanted to remember the good times, but because I needed to understand the scale of the lie I was about to dismantle. I went to the office and pulled out my laptop, opening a blank spreadsheet. I typed the names I'd seen in that phone. Jared, Brad, Miles, Trevor, Sean. I listed the dates from the messages, the meeting times, the suggestive photos. Patterns, data, evidence. Because this wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was an operation, and I was going to treat it like one. I'd spent my entire career finding hidden truths in numbers, exposing the vulnerabilities that could bring down a business. Now I was going to apply that same cold logic to my marriage. I wouldn't confront her tonight, or tomorrow. I'd wait. I'd gather every scrap of evidence, every text, every photo, every transaction. I'd be the man they didn't see coming. Because the phone might have been in the wrong car, but it had landed in the right hands. And I wasn't going to waste that. That night, she came home glowing. Her eyes sparkled with a rehearsed brightness, a look I'd memorized over the years, but never truly learned to read. She dropped her bag by the door, her perfume, spicy and unfamiliar, settling into the air between us like a wall. She walked into the kitchen, where I stood by the island, pretending to be casual, pretending to be the same man she'd left behind that morning. "Hey, love," she said, her voice a syrupy note of cheer that used to soothe me, used to make the world feel right. "Sorry I'm late. Client meetings ran over. You know how the Morrison campaign is these days." She leaned in to kiss me, but it was quick, almost mechanical. Her lips brushed mine like a courtesy, not a homecoming. I smiled back, masking the cold knot in my gut. "Of course," I said, my voice smooth, my eyes patient. "Big campaign. Big clients." I forced a chuckle, the kind that says I'm still the same trusting man, the one who always believed the best in her. She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Exactly. We've got some crazy deadlines, but it's all good. Just means a bigger bonus at the end." She flipped her hair, the way she always did when she was trying to steer the conversation, trying to keep me from looking too closely. I watched her move around the kitchen, opening the fridge, pretending to consider dinner. She'd always been good at pretending, smiling when she was tired, laughing when she was angry, nodding at just the right moments to make people think she was listening. For years, I believed those smiles. I'd built our life on them. The mortgage, the vacations, the anniversary dinners, all of it underpinned by the belief that those smiles meant something. Now, every time her lips curved upward, I saw the cracks, the tension at the corners of her mouth, the way her eyes darted to the side before meeting mine. I wondered how many times she'd smiled like that with someone else. How many times she'd walked into another room with that same glow, telling some other man that it was all just business, all just the Morrison campaign. I let her talk, let her fill the room with words that meant nothing. I nodded at the right moments, asked the right questions, all while filing each answer away in the same mental ledger I'd started the day I found that phone. Every detail mattered now. Every slip of the tongue, every nervous glance. "Maybe we should take a weekend away," I said, my tone light, like a man suggesting a spontaneous escape. "Just you and me. No Morrison, no clients. Just us." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. The hesitation. The quick calculation. "Oh, that sounds amazing," she said, her voice a shade too bright. "But you know, with the campaign right now, it's just so crazy." She let the sentence dangle, unfinished, like a rope that might hang us both. I smiled and reached across the counter, brushing a hair from her cheek. "Of course. After the Morrison campaign dies down," I said, repeating her own words back to her. Her eyes widened just a touch, and I wondered if she heard the steel in my voice. She leaned into my hand, her skin warm, her smile softening. "You're the best, Michael," she whispered. "Always so understanding." Understanding. That was what I'd been for 15 years, understanding. I'd absorbed every late night, every sudden conference, every unexplained text with a calm nod and a kiss on the forehead. I believed that marriage was built on trust, on giving the other person room to breathe, to grow. But she hadn't been growing. She'd been branching off into other lives, other arms. When she left the room, humming a tune that didn't sound like her, I called Frank Hartley. He'd been waiting for my call. A retired cop with a face like a weathered road map and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been my first real move in this new game I'd been forced to play. "Frank," I said when he picked up. "It's time." He didn't ask for details. He never did. "I'll start the tale tomorrow," he said. No point tipping her off with fancy equipment just yet. Old school works best. I'll have everything you need. Good, I said. My voice felt alien in my mouth, cold, decisive. I want to know everything. Where she goes, who she sees, everything. You got it, he said. Anything else? I hesitated, then shook my head even though he couldn't see it. No, I said. That's all for now. I hung up and stared at the wall, the family photos arranged in a neat line. Smiling faces. Happy eyes. Lies. I called Elias Monroe next. Elias was a divorce attorney with a reputation for turning financial discovery into financial devastation. The kind of man who could find money hidden in a shoebox in a stranger's attic. Michael, he said when he answered, his voice crisp, professional. Is this about Sabrina? I didn't flinch. Yes. I need to get started. Quietly. I want to know every asset she's moved, every secret account, every piece of debt she's tried to bury in my name. He whistled softly. You're serious. I'm dead serious, I said. When I move, I want everything lined up. I want every lie backed by hard truth. You're talking financial discovery, he said. That takes time. I've got time, I said, and I've got patience. Just tell me where to sign. We arranged the details, and when I hung up, I felt something in me settle. Not peace. Peace was a long way off, but a kind of purpose. A direction. I wasn't going to confront her in a blaze of anger. I wasn't going to be the man who flipped the table and demanded answers. I was going to be the man who dismantled her lies, one detail at a time. That night, she came to bed glowing, humming that same unfamiliar tune. She curled up beside me, her breath warm on my shoulder. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds until I couldn't hear her breathing anymore. Then I got up, careful not to wake her, and went to the office. I opened the legal pad I'd started that night at Cornerstone Cafe. I wrote down every detail, the name of the yoga studio, the Morrison account, the perfume, the way she'd smiled at the suggestion of a weekend away. Every word, every pause, every flicker of her eyes. I wrote it all down because when I finally moved, I wanted her to know that I hadn't missed a thing. Because the smile that had fooled me for years was just a smile, and I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The day she told me she was pregnant, she did it with tears in her eyes and trembling hands. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her lips pressed into a soft line that, to anyone else, would have looked like hope. To me, it looked like a last-ditch effort. I watched her place a hand on her stomach, flat and empty, not even a hint of a curve, and smile that same rehearsed smile she'd perfected over the years. 8 weeks, she whispered, her voice a carefully curated mix of vulnerability and excitement. I just found out. I forced my lips into a smile, the kind I'd learned from her. The kind that said, I believe you. The kind that said, I love you. Even though inside, I felt something cold and precise take root. 8 weeks. I did the math in my head, calculating dates the way I'd once calculated interest rates and investment returns. 8 weeks. That would have been right around the time I'd started noticing the cracks, her perfume, her smiles, her late nights at the Morrison account. I leaned forward, pressing my palm to hers, feigning the kind of comfort I'd always given her. That's incredible, I said, my voice even, my heart a steady drumbeat of calculation. Have you made a doctor's appointment yet? She shook her head, her smile trembling just enough to be believable. Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. I thought, maybe we could go together. I held her gaze, searching for the truth I knew wasn't there. Of course, I said. We'll go together. But even as I said it, my mind was already a step ahead. I'd built a career on data, on reading the fine print no one else bothered to check. I wasn't about to let emotions cloud my judgment now. That night, after she'd drifted off to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the screen a harsh blue in the darkness. I searched every local clinic, every doctor she'd mentioned in passing, every lab that could do a discreet paternity test. I didn't need her permission, I just needed the truth. I found a place. Private. Reliable. The kind of place that didn't ask questions as long as you paid up front. I scheduled the test, marked it on my calendar, and pretended to sleep until dawn. The following week, I left work early under the pretense of a conference call and drove to the lab. The nurse, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, led me into a sterile room with white walls and a single chair. I handed over the swab I'd taken from Sabrina's toothbrush, the one she'd left beside mine without a second thought, and sat in that chair, wondering when my life had become a crime scene. Results will take about 3 days, the nurse said, her voice clinical and indifferent. We'll email them to you. 3 days. 72 hours. It felt like a lifetime. I went home that night and watched Sabrina cook dinner. Spaghetti, her go-to comfort food, and talk about baby names like she was choosing a paint color. I nodded and smiled, played the part of the loving husband, all the while counting the seconds until the results came in. And when they did, on a Tuesday, ironically the same day she'd first kissed me cold, I opened the email in my office with a calm that surprised even me. 0% chance. Those words burned into my mind. 0% chance I was the father. No margin for error. No asterisks or footnotes to explain it away. Just a hard, unyielding truth. I wasn't the father. Jared was. Or maybe Brad. Or one of the others from that phone I'd found. It didn't matter. The betrayal was the same. I stared at the report, my mind oddly clear. I wasn't even angry, at least, not in the way I'd imagined I'd be. Anger was too hot, too noisy. What I felt was something colder, something harder. A determination that settled over me like armor. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair, the legal pad on my desk filled with dates and names, lines connecting each betrayal like a roadmap. Sabrina was carrying a symbol of her infidelity, a living, breathing testament to her lies, and she'd tried to brand it as mine. She looked me in the eyes and sold me a story, hoping I'd buy it the way I'd bought every other lie she'd told me. But I wasn't that man anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed the IRS hotline, the one they advertised for tips on tax fraud and offshore accounts. Jared's name was easy to spell. His shell companies were easier to find than I'd expected. I gave them everything: names, numbers, addresses. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I couldn't stand the thought of him walking away unscathed. Then I called Elias, my divorce attorney. "It's time," I told him. "You're sure?" he asked, his tone sharp, professional. "Positive," I said. "She's pregnant, and it's not mine." He exhaled. "Then we'll go for everything. Financial discovery, asset freezes, child support exposure. This is the kind of thing judges hate, Michael. It'll work in your favor." I hung up and stared at the empty house around me. Every surface felt like a prop, every photo a lie. I thought of the years I'd spent building this life. Every late night at the office, every promotion, every strategic plan meant to secure our future. All of it I'd done for us. And now, all of it felt like a monument to a marriage that had died a long time ago. That night, she came home glowing again, humming a song under her breath as she set her purse on the counter. She didn't notice me standing in the hallway, watching her. For a moment, I wondered if she'd ever see me again. Not the version she'd crafted, the understanding husband, the reliable man who'd always forgive, but the man who'd learned how to read the fine print of her lies. "Hey, love," she said, turning with that same practiced smile. "I thought we could." I raised a hand, stopping her words. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but final. Her smile faltered, just a fraction. "Of course. What is it?" I took a step closer. Her breath caught, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. "Michael, Don't," I interrupted. "Just don't. I'm done with the lies. From now on, everything goes through Elias. Everything." She opened her mouth, but I'd already turned away. I walked down the hallway, past the photos, past the memories. Because I wasn't the man she thought she'd married anymore. I was the man she'd made, cold, calculating, ready. The war had begun, and I wasn't smiling. By midweek, the war I'd begun in the quiet corners of my home had spilled out into the world, each carefully placed strike setting off small detonations that I knew would build into something that couldn't be ignored. I'd spent the last 15 years being the steady one, the predictable one, the man everyone trusted. And now I was going to use that trust to tear the lies apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth. I watched it unfold from my office window, the city spread out beneath me like a chessboard. Jared's office was the first to fall. I'd spent nights researching every company he'd tied himself to, every shady deal he'd made to keep up the illusion of a thriving consultancy. Offshore accounts that hadn't been declared. Shell companies stacked like Russian dolls. I'd given the IRS every detail anonymously at first, then through Elias so it would hit him like a freight train. That Wednesday morning, they raided his office. Uniforms and black jackets, the whole place swarming like ants in a sugar jar. I watched the live feed on my laptop, the footage a pixelated mosaic of chaos. Jared's face was pale, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief as agents carried boxes out the front door. I wondered if he thought about all the times we'd sat at that same office table, laughing over coffee, talking about our futures. I wondered if he realized that future was gone now. Sabrina called me before lunch. Her voice was tight, a quiver at the edges that I'd once mistaken for sincerity. Michael, I just got a call from Jared's assistant. They're saying he's being investigated. Is this you? I let her sit in that silence for a moment, the weight of the question pressing down on both of us. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice measured, the way I'd practiced it in front of the mirror. But you should talk to Elias if you have questions. He's handling everything now. Her breath hitched. Elias? Why would I? Because I'm done talking, I said, and ended the call. I sat back in my chair, staring at the city skyline, letting the satisfaction settle. I wasn't the type of man who found pleasure in other people's pain. But Jared wasn't other people. Jared had been my brother in every way that mattered, and he'd torn that apart with lies and stolen moments with my wife. I'd given him every chance to do the right thing, and he'd chosen betrayal. Now he was learning what betrayal cost. Bradley Ortiz was next. His law firm had always had a reputation for playing fast and loose with client funds, but I'd found the documentation that proved it. A letter I'd mailed, anonymously, of course, to his largest creditors had done the rest. By noon, they were circling him like vultures, and the call started. I let them go to voicemail, each one a desperate plea for help from a man who'd once called me brother. Sabrina called again in the afternoon, her voice frantic now. Michael, please. This is all falling apart. I don't understand what's happening. I imagined her standing in the kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd lied to my face so many times, the same kitchen where I'd believed her. I pictured her clutching her phone, her hair tangled, her eyes wild. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You can't be serious, she whispered when I didn't answer. Michael, this is our life. You can't just. I've never been more serious in my life, I said, and I meant it. Every word was a promise I'd made to myself the day I found that black phone, the day I realized I'd been a spectator in my own life. She started to cry then, the kind of sob that once would have broken me, made me reach for her, made me believe that we could fix this. But I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt clean, like I'd finally shed the last of the illusions that had kept me chained to her lies. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice cracking. We have a baby. Correction, I said coldly. You have a baby. I have the truth. I ended the call and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for months was gone, replaced by a cold clarity that felt like freedom. I wasn't the man she'd thought she'd married anymore. I wasn't the man Jared had thought he could deceive. I was the man who knew every secret, every account number, every hidden text. That evening, I watched the news. Jared's face appeared on the local station, the headline a brutal summary. Financial consultant under investigation for tax fraud. His wife Eau Claire stood behind him in the footage, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. I wondered if she'd known, if she'd guessed that the man she'd trusted was a liar and a thief. I thought about Sabrina then, alone in that house we'd built together, surrounded by the ghosts of a marriage she'd destroyed. I wondered if she was thinking about all the times she'd kissed me with someone else's perfume on her lips. I wondered if she was remembering the lies she'd told me over breakfast, the night she'd claimed to be working late while she was with Jared, or Brad, or whoever else she'd decided was more exciting than the man who'd built her life with his bare hands. I thought about the baby, too, the one she tried to pass off as mine. I thought about the life she tried to build on a foundation of lies. And I felt nothing but a quiet, precise satisfaction. Because the man they'd underestimated was gone. In his place stood someone who'd read every line, found every flaw, traced every lie back to its source. I poured myself a glass of scotch, just one, the way I always did when I needed to think, and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like dying stars. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a luxury for men who had something left to lose. I'd traded anger for calculation, for the quiet certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. Because sometimes justice isn't a courtroom or a jail cell. Sometimes it's a man with a plan and nothing left to fear. Sometimes it's the quiet undoing of every lie, every betrayal, every smile that ever masked a blade. And so I raised my glass to the skyline and whispered a quiet toast. To the truth, I said. May it always find the ones who think they can outrun it. And I drank. Saturday morning arrived with a gray sky and a biting wind that rattled the windows of the house I'd once thought of as home. The security camera's red light blinked at me from the corner of the porch. A small but constant reminder that I was no longer the trusting husband who believed in privacy for the sake of love. I'd installed it myself last month, right after finding the black phone. I told Sabrina it was for extra safety, but in truth, it was to witness every false smile, every hushed phone call she made while pretending to be mine. I'd expected them, though I hadn't expected them to come together. The black SUV pulled up just before noon, tires crunching over the driveway gravel. I stood in the living room, hidden behind the heavy curtains, watching the three of them, Sabrina, Jared, and Brad, climb out of the car. Desperate, pale, their faces drawn and tired, like a collective ghost of every lie they'd told me. Jared was first to the door, his hand poised as if knocking on a friend's house, not the fortress of betrayal I'd built. Sabrina stood behind him, her arms folded protectively over the slight curve of her belly, a gesture that once would have softened me, but now only hardened the steel in my spine. Brad lagged behind, his eyes flicking around nervously, scanning for exits or maybe the cameras he suspected but couldn't see. The doorbell rang, the chime echoing through the empty house. I took a breath, savoring the moment, the calm before the confrontation, the seconds where I still held all the cards. I opened the door. Jared's eyes met mine first, and he looked like he was about to say something rehearsed. I saw the guilt etched into the lines of his face, the tension in the way he stood. His lips parted, but I didn't give him a chance. "You're destroying lives," he said, the accusation trembling in his voice. I tilted my head, studying him the way I'd study a quarterly report. "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed them. I'm just shining a light on what you did." Sabrina stepped forward, her eyes wide, brimming with tears that I might have believed once. She clutched her stomach, fingers splayed across the small curve of her belly like a shield. "Michael, please," she said, her voice breaking. "This isn't you. You're not like this." My eyes moved to Brad, who stood there like a man waiting for his own funeral. He opened his mouth but said nothing. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his gaze darting from me to Sabrina like he couldn't decide which side to pick. "You're right," I told Sabrina, my voice steady. "This isn't who I was, but this is who I am now. Actions have consequences, Sabrina. You taught me that." "Think of the baby," she whispered, voice trembling. I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms across my chest. "The baby that isn't mine?" I asked, the question like a blade in the air. Her face crumpled, her lips trembling. Jared shifted his weight, looking like he wanted to disappear. "Michael, this is going too far," Jared started, his tone somewhere between pleading and angry. "We can fix this. We can make it right." I shook my head slowly. "You had your chance to make it right," I said. "You had your chance when you lied to my face, when you sat across from me at Enzo's with her hand in yours, when you played me for a fool." Brad finally found his voice, though it was thin and reedy. "Michael, man, this is insane. You're taking everything down with you." I laughed then, a quiet, humorless sound. "I'm not taking anything down. I'm holding up a mirror. If you don't like what you see, that's not my fault." Sabrina's tears spilled over then, fat drops sliding down her cheeks. "We're sorry, Michael," she whispered. "I never wanted it to be like this. I still love you." I felt nothing, no pity, no anger. Just a cold emptiness that had grown with every lie, every late-night text, every fake smile. "Love," I repeated. "Is that what you call what you did? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like betrayal." She reached for me then, her hand trembling, but I stepped back. "No," I said. "You don't get to reach for me now. Not after everything." Jared's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing. "You think you're so righteous," he spat. "But you're just as guilty as the rest of us. You let this happen. You let her drift away." I nodded slowly. "Maybe I did," I conceded. "But I'm the one who saw the truth. I'm the one who's not pretending anymore." The wind picked up then, rattling the doorframe. I glanced over Jared's shoulder, saw the leaves swirling in the driveway like confetti at a funeral. I straightened, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "This isn't revenge," I said, my voice calm and cold. "This is math. Actions. Consequences. Results. You chose your actions. Now you get to live with the consequences." Sabrina sobbed then, a quiet, broken sound that might have undone me once. But not today. Brad looked down at his feet, shame radiating from him like heat. Jared clenched his fists, his shoulders shaking with rage or regret. I couldn't tell which. I stepped back, placing my hand on the door. "We're done here," I said. "Take your lies with you. Take your guilt. I don't need them anymore." I closed the door, their voices muffled by the thick wood, fading as they stumbled down the steps, their world unraveling. I watched them on the security feed, huddled together by the car, their faces pale and drawn. I felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not even anger. Just silence. A quiet that felt like the first honest thing I'd heard in months. And I realized then that I didn't need their apologies or their explanations. I didn't need their guilt or their tears. Because I had the truth. And that was enough. Sunday morning came with an unexpected knock on the door. 3 short raps that carried a rhythm only Thomas would use. I hadn't seen him in months, and even then, it had been rushed drinks at an airport lounge, both of us too busy to be brothers. When I opened the door, he stood there, a grin on his face and a bottle of whiskey in one hand. "Michael," he said, his voice carrying the same easy confidence that had charmed every teacher we'd ever had. "Long time." I stepped aside, letting him in, and closed the door. He walked past the kitchen, past the half-empty living room, and settled into the old leather chair by the window. The bottle clinked on the coffee table as he set it down. "I heard about Jared," he said, and for a moment his smile faltered. "And Sabrina." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You always were the quiet one. The planner. The chess player." I stared at him, waiting for the catch. And he grinned. "And I wanted you to know I had your back. Before you even knew you'd need it." My eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "That job offer in London," he said. "My firm. I made sure they called you. I knew you'd need an out." I blinked. "You?" "Yeah," he said, nodding. "I knew something was off. The way you sounded on the phone. The way you talk about Sabrina. So I called in a few favors. Made sure they'd think of you when that role opened up." I sank into the couch, the shock settling in. "You?" I started again, but he waved a hand. "And Frank," he continued. "The private investigator? I hired him months before you even suspected. Paid him out of my own pocket at first. Figured you'd catch up eventually." I exhaled, the weight of it all hitting me in a rush. I'd been fighting alone in my mind, but in reality, Thomas had been my shadow, moving the pieces, stacking the board in my favor. "Why?" I asked, the words small and fragile. He shrugged. "Because I still remember the brother who dismantled debate teams like a tactician in college. I remember the man who taught me to fight fair and when to fight smart. I wanted to remind you he's still in there." I felt a tightness in my throat that hadn't been there in years. I looked at him, at the grin that was half mocking and half affectionate. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. He leaned back in the chair, stretching his arms. "Yeah, I did. Because I knew they'd underestimate you. Everyone always has." I thought about the years I'd spent being the reliable one, the patient one, the man who'd carry the weight of others' mistakes. I'd let Sabrina's lies fester because I wanted to believe in us. I'd let Jared's betrayal slide at first because I'd wanted to believe in friendship. But Thomas had seen what I couldn't. "You're a bastard," I said, but I was smiling. "Yeah," he said, lifting the bottle, "but I'm your bastard." I laughed then, a real laugh that felt like the first honest sound in a house full of echoes. I reached for the glass he'd poured, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Thomas sat back, his eyes sharp. "London's waiting," he said. "You don't owe them anything anymore." I nodded slowly, the weight of the past weeks lifting from my shoulders. "I know," I said, "and this time, I'm not leaving a single piece of me behind." He raised his glass, and I raised mine, the two of us locked in a silent promise. "To the ones who thought we'd never fight back," he said. "To the ones who taught us how," I replied. And together, we drank to the truth that had always lived between us. By Monday morning, the echoes of the chaos I'd unleashed were fading behind me like a city in the rearview mirror. Jared's office was dark, his name now a byword for fraud in the local news. Brad's creditors had picked him clean, every cent he'd stashed away now a liability. Sabrina's face, once so carefully curated for sympathy and charm, now filled screens in a PR scandal she couldn't talk her way out of. The local news called it the unraveling of a suburban queen, and I couldn't help but think how fitting that was. But I wasn't there to watch her fall. I had no forwarding address, no apologies left to give. Just 2 suitcases, one for clothes, one for documents, and a one-way ticket to London. Flight 428, the plane that would carry me away from everything I'd once thought was home. I sat in the terminal, the hum of voices and rolling suitcases all around me. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number, a single line that tried to pull me back into the mess I'd left behind. Sarah attempted suicide. Jared's family left him. Brad, unknown. I read the words, felt the cold indifference of them, and deleted the message. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the hero. I was the answer to the question, what happens when the quiet man finally sees? They'd underestimated me because I'd made it easy. I'd been the silent partner in my own life, the one who'd trusted, who'd believed, who'd thought love could withstand any betrayal. But trust without accountability is just a stage for liars to perform on. And I dismantled that stage, piece by piece, until the spotlight fell on the real actors, Sabrina, Jared, Brad. My boarding group was called, and I rose from the plastic chair that had dug into my back for hours. I clutched the handle of my suitcase, leather, scuffed from years of business travel that had once meant late-night returns to Sabrina's embrace, and felt its weight shift in my hand. As I walked down the jet bridge, the hum of the engines grew louder, a low, steady promise of distance. I found my seat by the window and settled in, the city lights beyond the tarmac blurred by the misty rain. London had always been a dream, an opportunity I'd never taken because I'd been too busy building someone else's future. But now it was my future, my escape. I closed my eyes and thought of Thomas, his grin as he'd lifted his glass, the way he'd reminded me who I was beneath all the careful compromises. He'd been right. The man who'd once dismantled debate teams like a tactician hadn't vanished. He'd just been waiting for a reason to reemerge. The engines roared to life, and the plane lurched forward. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the city shrink behind me. The ghosts of Sabrina's laughter, Jared's jokes, Brad's easy grin. They were all chapters in a story that no longer needed telling. Because when the smoke clears, what's left standing tells you who you really were all along. I watched the runway lights blur into a single line, felt the plane lift into the night sky. The hum of possibility filled my chest. No more lies. No more games. Just me, the man who had learned that sometimes the quiet ones hold the sharpest knives and the deepest truths. I turned off my phone, set it in the seat pocket, and let the sky carry me forward. Because sometimes you don't need revenge. Sometimes the best answer is just to leave the wreckage behind and walk away clean.